My grandmother taught me to read a chart before she taught me to read a name. She said a name could be argued with. A chart could not. We were 4 generations into the drift by then, and the chart she made me learn was the only chart the Havashi still carried whole. It was old, pressed into a sheet of gray ossuary film, the kind that does not rot and does not burn, the kind our ancestors used for grave records because they believed the dead deserved a surface that would outlast the living. The chart showed the outer verge in tolerable detail. It showed the coil of ash, and the shoals below Sarnag, and the dead lanes where the Ulmark combine used to run cargo before there was no combine left to run it. It showed the 71 anchorages our fleet would try and fail and try again. And in the lower quarter of the sheet, where a warm and crowded region of stars ought to have been drawn, the film was blank. Not damaged, not scraped, blank the way a wall is blank. Someone had drawn the border around it with great care, a thin, unbroken line, hand-cut, the cleanest work on the whole chart, and then had drawn nothing at all inside. "What is it?" I asked her. "It is the quiet reach," she said. "What's in it?" She was very old, and she took a long time with the answer, the way she took a long time with stairs. "Nothing you will ever see," she said. "Learn the border. Learn it so well that you could plot away from it in the dark with the lamps out with your hands shaking. Learn it better than you learn your own face." I was a child. I did what children do. I put my finger on the blank and I said, "But why is it empty?" And my grandmother, who had buried 2 sons in one world and had never once wept in front of me, took my wrist and lifted my hand off the film as though I had laid it on a wound. That was 91 years ago. My grandmother has been dead for 60 of them, and I am now the oldest thing aboard the Tan Coral, and there is not a soul left in this fleet who remembers being told that story by someone who was there. There is only me and the house book and 11,000 people in 83 hulls who are going to die in the cold within 4 years unless something changes. Last month the navigators came to me. They came politely, in the way of the young, which is to say they came with a decision already made and a wish to be told they had made it well. There were 3 of them. The one who spoke was Sath Rune, a good navigator, better than I ever was, thin as a rail, with the pale scalp-ridging that our people get when they are raised in bad air, which all of them were. He had a fresh plot in his hands, and he laid it on the ledger table in front of me the way you lay down a card you are certain of. "We are 1 light-year from the border," he said. "I know where we are." "Then you know what's on the other side of it." "Nothing," I said. "It's blank." Sath Rune did not laugh at me. That is one of the things I will remember about him. He waited, and he let the old man have his old man's answer, and then he said, "Keeper, the Reach has 41 habitable worlds, standing water, breathable air. The Thren survey from the conquered era logged them all before the conquered ended, and the log survives, and I have read it. 41. We need 1. We need 1 for 11,000 people who are drinking their own dead." He was not exaggerating. Our reclamation has been closed cycle for 9 years. There is nothing aboard the Tan Coral that has not been somebody once. "We are not going to cross the border," I said. "Give me a reason." "You have been given the reason since you were weaned. Every child aboard this fleet has been given the reason." "We have been given a silence," he said, and told to call it a reason. And then, because he was young and had decided to be brave in front of the old, he said it plainly. "Every atlas in the galaxy draws that line, Keeper, and not one of them says why. Not one. I have looked. I have opened Thren charts and said charts and 2 combine charts older than our exile, and they all agree on the border to the decimal, and every one of them leaves the inside empty, and every one of them leaves the margin empty too. Do you understand how strange that is? Species that could not agree on the length of a second agreed on this, and nobody wrote a single word about the reason." "Yes," I said, "that is what should frighten you." "It doesn't," he said. "It makes me think the reason is old and dead and everyone has forgotten to check." And I looked at him, This competent, exhausted, half-starved young man who had done more for our people in 10 years than I have done in 90, and I understood that he was not wrong to ask, that the fault was not in him. The fault was in us, the ones who had kept the border and had never once said out loud what it was made of, because to say it out loud is to say what we are. So I called the council, all 83 hulls by relay, every ship mother and every barge warden and every navigator of rank, and I told the warden of the drift, Alma Threth, that I intended to open the house book in front of the fleet and read from it, and that after I had read from it, we would vote on Sath Rune's plot. She stared at me for a long moment across the link. Alma Threth is not a sentimental woman. She has jettisoned people. You'll read the roster, she said. I'll read the roster. Duvin, there are children on this call. There will be no children on any call at all in 4 years, I said, and I would rather they hear it from a choral than guess at it in the dark. I want to be careful now about how I say this next part. I have had 91 years to arrange the words, and I have never once arranged them to my satisfaction. Every version is either a confession or an excuse, and the difference between those two things is only ever in the voice. So let me begin with the ledger, because the ledger has no voice. The house book of the choral is 900 years of household accounts. It is not a grand document. It is a record of purchases, wages, breakage, births, and burials, kept by whichever member of the house was least useful in a season, which is how I came to be its keeper. It records the price of grain in the Sarnag markets across 4 centuries. It records the year the roof of the east wing failed. It records that in the spring of the year our house stopped counting. A set of 18 porcelain bowls was broken and replaced. And on the left-hand column of every page, from the year the book was opened until the year it stopped, it records the Asari. Asari is our word. It is a soft word. It means roughly the hands of the house. It is the same word we use for the little strong roots that hold a short tree into a cliff face in a storm, the parts you never see that do the work, that are the reason the tree is still there. My people used it for 800 years to describe the humans who lived in our kitchens. They came to us cheaply. That is the truth, and it is the first thing that has to be said, because every other lie grows out of the gap where that fact should be. They were not conquered, not by the Havashi. We never fought them. Nobody did. By the time my ancestors bought their first pair, humans had been moving out of their own small, crowded region for 200 years, and the galaxy had already learned what they were good for. They were good for everything. That is not a compliment. Understand that. When I say the galaxy learned what humans were good for, I mean the galaxy learned that a human could be put in a room with a task it had never seen and would, without complaint and without instruction, work out how the task was done. That a human could stand a watch of 20 hours and stand another. That a human could eat what was left over and be well on it. That a human could be given a machine built by a species with a different number of limbs and a different number of eyes, and within a season the human would be maintaining it better than the species that built it. That a human placed in a household would within a year know the household, its rhythms, its cupboards, its quarrels, the sound of each of its members on the stairs, more completely than any member of the household knew it themselves. They were biddable. That was the word in the market houses of Sarnag. Biddable. It sat next to hardy and quick and patient in the auctioneer's litanies, and it was the word that sold them, because there was no work they could not learn and no order they would not take. I have to be exact here, because the inexactness is where we hid. They took the orders. They did not agree with them. There is a whole literature on this from the conquered period, thousands of pages by very serious Thren and said scholars, and every one of them circles the same observation and every one of them files it away as a curiosity. A human, told to do a thing, would do the thing. A human, asked whether the thing was right, would answer, and the answer was very often no. That is all. That is the entire anomaly, and the greatest civilizations that this galaxy has ever produced looked at it and shrugged and wrote it in the margin because it changed nothing. The work still got done. The bowls were still washed. The hull was still patched. What did it matter what they thought of us? They were the hands of the house. My grandmother, Ivan Koral, was born into a house with 16 of them. She told me their names once, all 16, sitting up in the dark on the third night of a passage, when I was perhaps 11, and she was not entirely herself, and afterwards she made me swear I would not repeat them. I have kept that oath for 80 years. I intend to break it in 6 days in front of 11,000 people, and I do not know yet whether that is repentance or vanity. She said that when she was a girl, the mornings of the house began with a sound, not a bell. Our people are not a people of bells. The sound was the Asari on the back stairs before dawn, going down to the kitchens, 16 sets of feet and low voices, and sometimes very quietly a song. My grandmother said that for the first 30 years of her life she did not know she was hearing it, in the way you do not know you are hearing your own heart. She said that she learned she had been hearing it on the morning it was not there. I have read every account of the silence that survives. There are fewer than you would think. The Sed sealed theirs. The Thren burned theirs, which tells you a great deal about the Thren. 2 Combine ships kept logs, and the logs are in the Verge archive under a seal that no living Havashi has the authority to break, and I have read them anyway, because I am 97 years old and there is a limit to what they can do to me. Every account agrees on the shape of it. Not one of them agrees on the hour because there was no hour. It was not coordinated. That is the thing that the young cannot be made to understand, and it is the thing that kept me awake through the whole of my middle life. There was no signal. There was no uprising. There was no message passed between worlds. The distances are too great. The humans in our kitchens had no ships and no transmitters and no access to either, and the ones aboard our hulls were 400 light-years from the ones in our kitchens and had been for generations. They simply stopped, all of them everywhere, across 9,000 worlds and 1,100 fleets, within the same handful of days. They did not attack. Write that down. Carve it. In 800 years of household service on 9,000 worlds on the days of the silence, there is not one credible account of a human striking a member of an owning species. Not one. The Sed looked for it. The Sed wanted it so badly that they manufactured 4 accounts and were caught doing it. What they did was stop. My grandmother woke in the dark, and the stairs were quiet. She lay in her bed a long while and could not name what was wrong. Then she rose and dressed herself, which she had never in her life done, and found that she could not fasten the shoulder of her own coat and stood in her room holding the 2 ends of it in her hands like a fool. She went down. The kitchen fires were cold. The Asari were in the kitchen, all 16 of them. They were sitting on the long bench along the wall in their own clothes, hands in their laps, awake, waiting. The eldest of them was named, and here she stopped, the first time she told it, and would not go on for an hour. The eldest of them rose when my grandmother entered out of habit, and then, having risen, did not do anything else. He stood there. He looked at her. My grandmother, who was 31 years old and had never in her life given an order she thought about twice, told him to light the fire. He said no. And she said she told me this, she made herself tell me this, and her voice was flat as the ossuary film. She said, I asked him why, and he said, you know why. And I did not. I stood in my own kitchen and I did not know why. And that was the moment I understood that he had known me for 31 years, and I had not known him for 1 day of them, and that everything he knew about me he had learned while I was not bothering to look. She said no one raised a voice. She said the house filled slowly in the gray light, with the family coming down one by one in their unfastened coats. She said her father shouted. She said her uncle went for the strap and came back without it and would never say why, and never touched a human again in his life. She said the 16 sat on the bench, and the fire stayed cold, and the sun came up over a house that did not work. And she said that by the end of the 2nd day, the worst of it was not the fear. It was the quality of the attention. 16 people, sitting quietly in a house they knew better than the family did, watching the family discover that they could not feed themselves. Nobody was killed in the Coral house. Nobody was killed in most houses. In the ones where somebody was killed, it was, in every documented instance, one of us killing one of them out of terror on the first or second morning, and the said records are very careful to note that in the houses where this happened the remaining humans did not retaliate. They stood. They watched. They went on watching for 11 days and then they walked out. They walked out, across 9,000 worlds, down the back stairs and out through the kitchen doors and into the roads, and by the end of the season there was not a human in service anywhere in the settled galaxy, and no owning species had raised a hand to stop them, because, I want to be precise, I want to be exact, this is the whole of it, because there was nothing to stop. There was no line to break. There was no siege to lift. There was only a great many people quietly declining to hold the tree into the cliff any longer, and a great many other people discovering all at once what the wind was like. That was the silence. Everything after it was ours. Here is where the ledger gets thin. 900 years of accounts, and for the 4 decades after the silence there is almost nothing, a page of debts, a note about the East Wing, a list of the sold horses. The Coral were not writers of history. We were owners of things, and when the things left, we stopped having anything to say. But the galaxy wrote in its way, and the writing is in the shipping manifests and the mortality tables and the tax rolls, and I have spent 40 years reading them, and this is what they say. Nothing happened. The said expected retribution and prepared for it for 11 years, ruining themselves. The Thren expected a war and built a fleet for it and had nowhere to send the fleet. The Combine, which had run half the traffic of the outer verge on human crews, found that it could not run a quarter of it on its own and spent 40 years learning too, and by then there were 3 other Combines and none of them were the Combine. My own people, the Havashi, we did not fall. That is important, and it is worse. We shrank. We did not know how to do things. We had 800 years of a civilization built with our hands in our laps, and it turned out that a great many of the things we thought were ours had never been ours at all. Not the ship's maintenance rotas, not the terraces on the Sarnag Hills, not the knots we used, not the medicine, not the songs the children sang, which we found had been taught to them by kitchen staff, and were, when we finally listened to the words, not about anything we had ever been told they were about. We had let something else run our house for 800 years while telling ourselves we were the ones at home in it, and when it walked out, we discovered we were guests. None of that is the reason for the line on the chart. I want to be clear. Humiliation does not make a border. Empires have survived worse humiliations and drawn no lines at all. The line came later. The humans went home. Not immediately and not all at once. It took 140 years for the last of them to move back to that small crowded region they had come out of, and in that time they did not build an empire, they did not take a world from anyone, they did not raise a fleet, and every intelligence service in the galaxy watched them do it, sick with anticipation, waiting for the blow. The blow never came. That is the thing, that is the whole of the thing. They went home and they closed the door. Not with a wall. There is no wall. Sath Rune could fly through the border tomorrow at cruising speed and nothing would touch him, no minefield, no picket, no challenge, nothing, and this is documented because for 200 years after the closing, ships did go in. Diplomatic ships, trade ships. Then, when the diplomats and traders did not come back, the fleets. I have the return logs of 6 of those fleets. I mean the actual logs, the ones the ports kept. The arrival manifests with the columns for names of vessels expected. 6 fleets. The said sent 2 and the Thren 1 and the Combine 2 and the Havashi because we were proud, and because we were the ones most ashamed, and shame is the shortest road to a war. The Havashi sent 1, 209 hulls. The Verge expedition. It was the largest thing my people ever built, and we built it out of the sale of 9 houses on the Sarnag Hills. and my ancestor's name is on the 5th page of the crew roll. The return log of the Verge expedition is a document you can hold in one hand. It has a header and a date, and a column with 209 spaces for the names of the vessels expected home. The column is blank. Not one entry, not a single ship logged as lost or wrecked or fired upon, because to log a ship as fired upon you need a witness and a wreck, and there was neither. Nothing came back to be counted. There was no debris on the border, no distress transmission, and understand what that means, understand it in your stomach. 209 crews, and not one of them had time or reason or the will to say a single word. And there was no declaration afterward, no terms, no demand. Nobody in the quiet reach ever told us what had happened to our fleet, or that anything had happened to it at all, or that they had noticed it come. The 6 fleets are the reason every atlas has a border. 6 empty columns in 6 port authorities over 200 years, and after the 6th one nobody sent a 7th, and the cartographers of 4 species independently drew the same thin, unbroken line, and left the inside blank, and wrote nothing in the margin. Now the young will say, fear then, the line is fear. 6 fleets went in, 6 fleets died, and we are afraid. That is what I believed until I was 60 years old, and it is a comfortable belief, and I no longer hold it, and I am going to say why in front of the fleet in 6 days. Because there is a 7th document, and I have it, and it is not a fleet. It is a passenger manifest. 11 years after the Verge expedition, when my people were in the first of our famines, a Havashi hospital ship called the AlienEmpire, old, unarmed, painted with the gray stripe that every species in the galaxy still honors, went to the border with 4,000 of our sick aboard and no plan except to be seen. Its master's name was AlienEmpire, and she was, by every account, an unimaginative woman. She crossed. She went 9 days inward. She was met at no point by anything. On the 10th day, at a distance she never logged, her ship was boarded. Her account of the boarding is 1 paragraph long. She wrote it 30 years later, and she wrote it once. It says that they came aboard without weapons and went through the ship in silence for 6 hours. It says they did not speak to her. It says they went to the wards, and to the reclamation, and to the water, and to the food stores, and that they looked at everything for a long time, and that not one of them ever raised their eyes to her face. She writes, and this is the sentence I have read 10,000 times, the sentence that has eaten my life, she writes. They moved through my ship the way a person moves through the house they grew up in. They repaired the water plant. They left the ship stocked to the ceiling. They corrected her plot, which was wrong, and set her a course home, and they went off her hull, and she never saw them again, and no one aboard the AlienEmpire died that year. They did not say a word to her, not one word, not a warning, not a rebuke, not a term, not a name. 4,000 of my people lived because of it, and every one of them came home and never spoke of the reach again. And AlienEmpire, who was unimaginative, and who wrote 1 paragraph in 30 years, killed herself. Do you see it? I need someone to see it. I have never in my life been able to make anyone see it who did not already know. They were not cruel to her. That is what could not be borne. If they had killed her ship, we would have had a war, and a war is a thing a people can live inside for 1,000 years. A war would have made us their enemies, and to be an enemy is to be, at last, taken seriously, to be the sort of thing that is fought. We were not fought. We were fed. We were repaired. We were sent home with our course corrected, by people who had washed our bowls for 800 years and had learned every stair of the house, and who did not think we were worth speaking to, and who were right. 6 fleets went in and did not come out. Nobody knows what happened to them, and I have made my peace with not knowing, and here is the peace. It does not matter. It is not the fleets that keep us out. It is the hospital ship. The line on the chart is not fear of death. Death is ordinary, and every one of the species that drew that line has walked into death for less. The line is drawn because on the other side of it is the only place in this galaxy where we cannot lie about what we are. Everywhere else, We can be the Havashi of the terraces, the makers, the old people with the good chart. There, we are the family in the unfastened coats, standing in a cold kitchen, being looked at by someone who knows us. They never came for us. Do you understand? They never came. They did not need to. That is the whole content of the border, and it is why no cartographer of any species has ever written a word in the margin, because the word would have to be ours and not theirs. We would have to write, "This is the place where the servants live, and they will not have us, and they are not angry." And so we drew a clean line, and we called it forbidden. And we let the young believe that something in their kills, because that is a bearable thing to teach a child. 6 days from now, I will stand in front of the fleet and open the house book to the left-hand column, and I will read the 16 names. I have thought about this a great deal. It would be easier to burn the book. Warden Threth suggested it in as many words, and she is not a coward and she was not being cruel. She meant that a people cannot cross a border they are ashamed of, and that if the shame were gone the crossing would be possible, and 11,000 of us would live. She is right about the first part. I have spent 4 decades proving that she is right about the first part. But you cannot burn a ledger. You can burn the paper. The account remains, and it is not held in the paper, and it is not held in us. It is held over there in a small crowded region of stars, by people who remember the names of every one of us, who remember the shape of our stairs, and who have never once said what they remember, because they are not interested in our shame and never have been. That is what the young cannot get through their heads. They think the humans are waiting for an apology. They are not waiting. They went home and they closed the door and they got on with their lives, and the door has been shut for 2,000 years, and behind it there are 41 habitable worlds and standing water, and nobody in there is thinking about the Havashi at all. We are the only ones thinking about it. The border is entirely ours. We built it out of ourselves, and we handed the plans to our children, and we told them it was made of monsters. Sath Rune came to me again last night. He did not bring a plot this time. He sat down on the bench along the wall of my ledger room, the long bench. I have one. We all have one. Our people build them into every room out of a habit 900 years old, and nobody ever asks why. And he sat on it with his hands in his lap, and he said, "If it's true, then they'd take us, if it's the way you say. They repaired the ferry. They'd take 11,000 starving people, wouldn't they?" "Yes," I said, "I think they would." He looked at me for a long time. "Then we're going to die out here," he said, "because you can't stand to be helped by them." And I told him the truth, which I had never said aloud, and which I will say to the whole fleet in 6 days. "No," I said, "we're going to die out here because they would help us, and they would not ask for anything, and they would not want us to stay, and they would put us right and correct our course and send us on. And in 100 years, there would be Havashi children who had never heard of any of this, who had been born on a world that people gave us out of nothing but decency. And those children would grow up thinking that the Reach is a place where kind, quiet people live. And they would be right. And nobody would ever again know what we did." He did not answer. "There is one thing left that belongs to us," I said. "One thing that nobody in the quiet Reach is holding for us, that we did not have washed and folded and put away by somebody else. It is the memory of what we made them do. It's a poor thing. It is the last work of our own hands, and if we take that water, we will hand them that too, and they will not even notice they have taken it, and then there will be nothing that is ours at all." He sat with it. He was crying quietly in the way of a man who has done the arithmetic 3 times. "That's not a reason," he said at last. "That's a vanity keeper. That's just one more thing we're making them carry. And do you know, he may be right. He is a better navigator than I ever was. I have been wrong about most things for 97 years, and I have never once been able to tell at the time. But the vote will be the fleet's, not mine. That is the one improvement we have made in 2,000 years, and it is not nothing. I know how it will go. I have known since the night the navigators came. Alma Threth will call the roll of the 83 hulls, and I will read the 16 names into the silence, my grandmother's 16, in the order the ledger has them, first names only, because first names are all we ever wrote down, and by the 9th name there will not be a sound in the fleet, and by the 16th there will not be a hand raised anywhere for the crossing. Not because they are afraid. My people are not afraid. 11,000 of us are going to sit in the dark and starve within a light year of open water, and they will do it with their chins up, and they will do it for the worst and oldest of reasons, which is that we would rather perish in the cold than be seen clearly by the ones who cleaned our rooms. The charts will not change. Someone in some other fleet in some other century will cut a thin, unbroken line around a blank quarter of a sheet, and will not write a word in the margin, and will not know why they did not. Let me be the one who says it, then, once, before the film outlasts me. They are not monsters. There is nothing in there that hunts. The line is not there because they would kill us. The line is there because they would not.